Okay. Well, thank you for attending my presentation. Let's see about a higher order adaptive network model on the interplay of interpersonal synchrony during a group worship session for reliving memory and religious experience through intersensory facilitation. It's a long title, but it gives uh, the right idea about what I'm talking about. So first, the scenario I'm trying to model, and I was given. It's about the religious ceremony, and the specific scenario given was a Catholic ceremony. But as you will see, it's broadly applicable. So it can be applicable to multiple religious ceremony, not just a Catholic ceremony. And it's about the worship leader and some participants that attend the ceremony, and those participants are cognitive impaired. So they have some problem with participating in the actions or feeling the actions, and the worship leader helps them by explaining different actions and what they're going to do, and sort of lead them through the ceremony. And this leading through the ceremony is done by synchronization. The participants and the worship leader, there's a point where they synchronize with each other actions, and they really start to get a feeling for each other, and they go through the ceremony together. And as you will see, this synchronization, this going through the ceremony together will improve the cognition of the participants, and they will eventually really start to relive some memories or some past religious experiences, and that results eventually in a religious and cognitive climax. So first, cognition. It's a broad term. It is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and senses. So it's not something you can model directly. Cognition encompasses all aspects of the ceremony. So it is something that it's not directly modeled, but can be taken from the model indirectly. That can be seen in the improvement of performing and representing the different actions during the session in the participant. But first, before I'll show some simulations, it's good to know that during the ceremony, there are different actions. So I made the distinction between 3 different actions. There are actions that convey affection, movement, and audio. And as you can see in the snippet below, it's just an example of how it's done in a table. So each action can either has three modalities. And you can see that if you see my pointer, you can see that here. So there are 3 actions. This is the representation states of the different actions of person, the worship leader or the participant. For example, if you have an audio action, someone is singing a bit along, the worship leader is singing a bit along, and someone senses that. It can help either with not only with recreating an audio section, but also with a movement action and affection action. And that's why there are cross connections here. That's because one action does not only help preparing for another action, it helps with preparing multiple action. Because if you hear something, it's not only that you might want to sing along, it is also that you might move a bit with the beat, or move a bit, start to smile a little bit to show affection. So that's why there are cross connections. And these cross connections also allow to model different kinds of persons that are differently cognitive impaired, because maybe some person has more trouble with really understanding the lyrics or something. So it has trouble with singing along, creating an audio action, can still hear the beat well and get the rhythm. So with movement actions, moving along with the beat, they have less problem. So this cross connection is also allowed to make differences in the weights, and therefore create different cognitive impaired persons. And this specific base model is of the worship leader. The one of the participants looks the same, but the main difference is the context state, which indicates the start of the session. So the worship leader starts the session. That's why he has the context state. at the start of the session, you immediately start at the God model, these 4 states. The worship leader accesses his God memory, and from his God memory, he makes a representation of the God image he has, and he can break down his God image into the God action he's going to convey and the emotion of God he's going to convey. And this God model kicks off his preparation stage and his execution stage to take the lead and show the participants through the ceremony. Also, in order to show this synchronization, to show that the participant and the worship leader eventually help each other through the ceremony, or mainly the worship leader, the participant, there are intersync states. So for each modality, there's an intersync state where the worship leader and also the participant synchronizes his execution, his action, with what he senses around him from the world state. You can see a world state comes in, the participant or the worship leader senses that, and he can synchronize that with his own actions. And in addition to that, there are intrasync states that synchronize the actions of the participant or the worship leader himself. So as you can see, each action is synchronized with each other, also allowing to get more into the session. Well, I talked a bit about the religious awakening or the cognitive awakening that a person experiences through the session, and that is represented by the conscious emotion. Conscious emotion shows more the emotional investment in the session, and it also is mainly impacted by emotions, so the God emotion and the affection sense, the affection that the person feels, but also as he gets more into the session, so as he synchronizes his own actions with what's going on around him, he also increases conscious emotion. So this will look with the 2 agents, the worship leader and the participant. These are essentially the same states, so these arrows are not necessary, but they react on each other's world states all the time, so it goes around in a circle. So there are some W states needed to model this. I have these W states here. They all use alogistic learning, and these 5, 6, 7, and they are used for synchronization. So they have as input the intersync and intrasync states, and they determine the weight from the sense to representation states and from the prep to execution states. So as the person synchronizes with what's going on around him, he can better represent the senses. He gets better, so his cognition improves. He can better represent what's going on around him, and as a result of that, he can better execute his intended actions. Here you got some other W states, and they are for preconditioning to connect the link between the representation states and the God emotion and God action state. So it's the same image again, but then with the adaptive, first adaptive layer. So the simulation, that's the main part. The worship leader starts off the session and the participant follows. So I will start talking about the perspective from the worship leader to give a clearer image. As I talked about before, there are cross connections. So you can model different cognitive impaired persons. In this simulation, there are no difference in weights. So this person is equally cognitive impaired. And as a result of that, you'll see some overlap in lines. So you'll see some more states below the graph and less lines, but that's because some lines overlap in this case, because there's no difference in the modalities. So this is the overall image with all the states. I will break down this. As you can see, this is where the interesting part happens. We also have some states rising all the way in the beginning, and that's where I'll start. So you have this blue line that goes up first. That's the context start, context state that indicates the start of the session. And a result of the start of the session, the worship leader will create his God image, and from his God image, he will create a God emotion and action state. This representation states. So you can see that he is ready to convey the message of God, to convey the emotion and actions that can be felt throughout the session. His God memory stays constant at 1 in this case, because he has done such many sessions before, so he doesn't have to fresh up on his God image or something like that. He has it ready to go. He knows what he's going to do, so that's ready. That's constant, and from that he can create his God image, and from that he can create the God emotion and God action. So as a result that he's now ready to go to convey actions and emotion of God, he can now make preparations for the actions that are going to be taking place throughout the ceremony. So this is the salmon colored line that goes up first. Since he has done many ceremonies before, he knows what actions are going to take place. So he can take preparations for that early on. That's why the line also rises early on. But as you can see at the end, there's a little bit of nudge. And that is because although he has had many sessions before and he knows in general what's going to take place, persons are very different individually. So the final step that is needed for the religious awakening might be different depending on the person. And that's why he can't make the last preparation. He has to wait for some time throughout the session to get an idea of what action is needed to help that person. And the same story can go for the conscious emotion state. That's the gold colored line. He's also, because he has done many sessions before, he can really get into the mindset and have this emotional experience earlier on to lead the participant with him to show what they're after. And then you have the execution states of the actions. Since he has to take the lead, his execution states will rise earlier on. So this is him showing what to do to the participant. And as you can see, we have the world states created by a participant, and that is essentially the same as the execution states of the participant. They come later on as he is following the lead of the worship leader. So the worship leader explains what to do, and then the participant follows his actions. And as the participant follows his actions, the worship leader again senses these actions and can represent the actions that he senses of the participant. As you can see, it all happens a bit sudden. And that is because of the synchronization that you'll see here. So we have the inter and intra-synchronization states. So two is the yellow and the baby blue line. As they start to rise, you can see that the W states that are used for synchronization also starts to rise. And because they start to rise, this starts to happen. They can really, as they really get into the session, they synchronize with each other. They can ramp up the actions, and that all happens very suddenly. And you can also see it's a very slow build in the actions that the worship leader has. So he's taking his time in the beginning, but as soon as synchronization happens, he can really ramp it up, and they start to get really into the session, and they can make some progress. And that is because of the synchronization that happens. So first, the worship leader has to wait before he feels that he's synchronized with participant. They make some connection, and then he can wrap it up and start really getting into the session. As you can see, the W states for pre-connection, they rise later, and that's because they heavily rely on the representation of the different actions. And these representations happen later on as the actions really start to happen. So W states for pre-connection, they rise later on. And as you can see now, if you put the graphs underneath each other, it all happens around the same time because decrease of the synchronization. So this gives a clearer image. Then there was the worship leader. How was about the participant? it mainly happens the same because of synchronization. So the order and the time it all happens is mainly the same, since as they synchronize, they really start to form one unit, and they feel each other. And this can be seen also because the world states created by worship leaders actually same as his execution states. As you can see, the execution states ramp up. This is sensed by the participant eventually, and he prepares for actions and he executes them. But there's this weird line that you can see that might be surprising, and that's the representation states. No, the preparation states for the actions the participant is gonna execute. And why this line is this steep will become clear later, but this can be explained as the participant is mentally ready to take the actions. Why he's mentally ready come later, but he's mentally ready to execute his actions, but he can't yet because he's still a bit cognitive impaired, and this improvement in cognitive impairment comes later on when a synchronization starts to pick up. So he becomes more cognitive able, and because of that, he's ready to execute the actions he has in mind. So this preparation doesn't mean he's ready to go. It just means he mentally knows what to do. And now, because of his improvement in cognition, he can actually execute them. And also, as you can see, he knows what to do. And that final nudge I talked about with the worship leader, he can also see this eventually, that he can feel this preparations the participant has made. So he can also, around this time, make a final nudge in preparations for his actions to release the participant. So here's again the same story about the synchronization. It all happens around this part, and it's the same as the worship leader. You can see as synchronization starts to take off, all the other states also start to take off. And about this weird jump in representation, well, it looks weird, but it isn't weird. I talk about that's because of this blue line. It's the called action representation states and the called emotion representation states. So as the worship leader conveys the called emotion and called action, and the participant starts to synchronize with the worship leader, he's able to pick up on this called emotion and called action that are already fully conveyed, are being fully conveyed by the worship leader. He starts to pick up on that, and he can recreate this called emotion and called action feeling that he's getting from the worship leader. And because the preparations needed for the conscious for the religious awakening mainly come from the called action representations, he can make his own representation for the execution state already early on. So he feels the actions of God that are being conveyed, and he can now make his own preparations to recreate that. And that's why the called action and called representation and representation states for different actions shoot up earlier on. And also, as you can see, we have this blue line that stays constant, and that is the called memory representation. So I didn't mention that before, but with the participant, he has also a gold memory, and this gold memory represents how religious this person was in the past. This person has some religious experience before, and this experience is hidden a bit because of the cognitive impairment. This religious experience has sunk down a bit, but still there. It just needs to be unlocked. So this can be given different values to model how religious this person was in past experiences. So in this case, this helps with when the called emotion, called action start to rise. It helps with recreating the called image representation that comes later on. And you can see it only rises to the level of the hidden God memory. The person doesn't get more religious. It's just that he unlocks the hidden past experiences. And also, as seen before, with the worship leader, the God image representation is created first, and from there the God emotion and God action states are created. With the participant, it's the other way around. First, the God emotion and God action of the person of the worship leader is sensed because he conveys it, and then from this and his God memory, the participant can create his God image representation, and it all helps towards the spiritual awakening or the conscious emotion, which is this yellow line that rises later on and reaches its peak, displaying the religious awakening or the cognitive awakening. So as you can see, we have here the participant worship leader, all the states, and all happens around the same time. But with the worship leader, it's less impacted with synchronization. As you can see, he takes the preparations to lead the session, where the participant can take such preparation. He has to wait for the worship leader to show and explain before he can really ramp it up. And it's all around the same time because of synchronization. They follow each other leads. And that's why you get an image like this where it all is happening at once. So yeah, thank you for listening. That's the presentation.